My name is Beatrice Rasmussen. I've been working with Dr. David Laurie since about June, and I'm going to talk about the classification of global ocean biomes. This is a brief outline of my talk, and the first thing I want to talk about is why do we care about a classification of ocean biomes? Now, a classification system is very important because it allows people to talk in a manner that they can all agree upon. So communication would be important. Another thing that we would want to be able to do is organize the biomes in a way that would facilitate study of them. Now, the ocean is a very large and variable environment that is difficult to take measurements of. We have satellites which can take global measurements of the ocean's surface, but to get in situ measurements on and in the ocean, we would need to use a ship. There are many processes that occur in the ocean that would affect the biomes, and a good classification system should take these into consideration. Things like atmospheric processes and ocean processes like the upwelling and Ekman transport. Another thing that a good classification system should be able to do is characterize the ocean in such a way that we can look at where fish species would be so that fishermen can find the fish that they want, where the endangered species would be so that we could try to act to protect those environments. Now, I'm going to talk about two relevant classification systems. The first was done by Longhurst. He did 4 domains, and he split these domains up based on the variability of stability of the ocean waters, nutrient supply, light penetration, and he did try to take into consideration the physical processes that were occurring. The 4 domains that he came up with were the polar domain, which is at high latitudes, the westerlies domain, which is at mid-latitudes, the trade winds domain, and then the tropical or coastal domain. The other relevant classification system was done by Hardman Montfort. He also split the ocean up into 4 basic domains, and he used satellite data, a principal component analysis of chlorophyll. And he looked at the concentration and the gradients in the chlorophyll to split these up. He also tried to include physical processes in this classification system. The 4 domains that he came up with were the very high chlorophyll and chlorophyll gradients domain. This one was mainly around the coast. He looked at the high chlorophyll, that would be in regions of upwelling, intermediate chlorophyll, and low chlorophyll. Now, the low chlorophyll would take place around the gyres. And I want to point that out because one of the, that's the wrong way. One of the figures that he did was this one. He used CWIF's chlorophyll data from the satellite, and he averaged the data on a monthly basis from 1998 to 2004 to get good coverage. And you'll notice that purple is very low chlorophyll concentration, and the low chlorophyll concentrations is pretty much stable. It is in the central gyres of the ocean. But if we look at the high chlorophyll concentrations, that would be the yellow and the red. In January, the yellow and the red occurs more in the southern hemisphere, and in July, it occurs more in the northern hemisphere. Now, the classification system that is under development at this time is the Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard, CMEX. CMEX would be a potentially global classification. We would like to have a simple format of common terminology that everyone can agree on that would be complementary to existing wetland classifications, and it would be used for the monitoring, protecting, and restoration of habitats. There are 5 components in the CMEX classification that were used to find the 3 basic systems. The 3 basic subsystems include the marine system, which is all oceans, The estuarine system, which is where rivers go into oceans, and the lacustrine system, which would be inland, land-bound waters, like inland seas and lakes, deep lakes. The 5 basic components are listed here, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. The first one is the water column component. Now, the water column component would look at the structure, the processes, the patterns in the water column. It would be used to split the ocean up into vertical and horizontal grid. The vertical grid would be the zones, and the epipelagic is from 0 to 200 meters, mesopelagic from 200 to 1,000. We have the bathypelagic, abyssopelagic, and hadopelagic. The horizontal system would be called the subsystems. We have the near shore, which is from 0 to 30 meters in depth. The neritic, which is from 30 meters depth to the shore, the shelf break. Now, the shelf break is not at a given depth. It is where the gradient of the ocean floor hits a certain value. And it happens anywhere from 100 to 200 meters deep. And the last system, subsystem, would be the oceanic. And it's the rest of the ocean. The benthic biotic component is the next component. And this is looking at living organisms. What living organisms are there present on the substrate, in the water column? But mainly I want to stress this is living. And it can be within the underlying 15 centimeters of the water, the ocean floor. The surface geology component looks at the small scale geology. It is also the upper 15 centimeters, and they're looking at the composition of the substrate. Is it sediment? Is it reef? What kind of material is there? We have sand, we have mud, we have cobbles, and the different classifications, we have to use a method that is common to all. There are several classifications that they use. Now, the subbenthic component is looking at material deeper than 15 centimeters. It also, though, is looking at the composition. Is there reefs? Is there substrate? What kind of material is there? And the last component is the geoform component. This is large scale, regional component that would be looking at things that would affect atmospheric and ocean interaction. I've got a picture here of a seamount, and the scale is the depth below ocean surface. And that would, something like this would really interfere with ocean circulation, because an obstacle like that could affect currents. Now, the future work that we're going to be doing is taking 5 quantities, and we're going to put them in a machine learning process. The quantities we're going to be using are sea surface temperature. Now, this is important because marine organisms need a given temperature to survive. They have a temperature range that they live in, and if you go outside that temperature range, they're going to die. So this would be important. We get this data, or infer this data, from a wavelength of 11 to 12 micrometers from the satellite data. And the CMAX splits this up into 4 classes. The next one is the sea surface salinity. Now, the sea surface salinity is grams of salt per 1,000 grams of seawater. And marine life also has a salinity range that it can live in. It's not going to live in too saline water, and different species require different salinities. This is also important because it affects the mixing of the seawater layers. Mixing is important because some layers are going to be rich in nutrients, and we want to know whether or not those nutrients are going to be able to move between the water layers. And different salinities do not mix well. This is also derived from remote sensing data. The chlorophyll concentration, this is modeled from satellite data, and it is a measurement of how much plant life is in the ocean. Understand that plants produce chlorophyll, and the plants in the ocean would be like phytoplankton, and phytoplankton forms the basis of the food chain. So we are interested in what kind of chlorophyll, how much chlorophyll there is in different regions, because if there's chlorophyll, then there's food for any sea life. This is modeled from the remote sensing satellite data and has 3 classes. The euphonic depth, this is a measurement of how far light penetrates below the surface of the water. It is also very important because if we don't have light, we don't have plant growth. And turbidity of the water would be a strong effect of this. Turbidity is a measure of the suspended particulates in the water. There are 5 classes based on the turbidity of this, and this figure that I have here is the normalized irradiance versus depth of penetration. This is for clear waters. Of course, it does depend on the turbidity, and the more turbid the water, the less it will be able to penetrate. The light will be able to penetrate. Okay, delta temperature is the temperature difference between sea surface and sea bottom. This is important because it has to do with the mixing. The more mixed the waters are, the more nutrients there are in the upper layers, the more plant life can grow, and of course then the more ocean life that we would have. So this is also an important quantity, and it has 3 classes. Now, for research, Naveen and I are going to be using machine learning. We want to come up with a finer scale classification system, taking these data products and applying it globally. We would like to use this classification system to answer such questions as what physical processes are actually affecting the marine life, where are the commercial fish at any given time, and what are the characteristics, the occurrence and extent of hypoxic dead zones. These are my references, and I hope you enjoyed my talk. Thank you.